Hey everyone, my name is Daniel. In today's video, let's take a look at the new billing options for Copilot Studio, especially after the announcement that was made on January 15th of 2025. So one of the things I talked about was instead of me doing this recording solo, I should bring somebody else in so we can have a discussion. It's also helpful to have other opinions over here. And after thinking for a while, the one person I could think of who has worked with Copilot Studio heavily and also has experience all the way from the Power Virtual Agent days was Joe. So I'm going to go ahead and now invite Joe. There we go. Hey, Joe. Thanks so
Hey,
much
how's it
for
going?
joining. Thank you so much for taking the time off your busy schedule and joining over here. Really, really appreciate that. And Joey, you are a jack of all trades. You are a Microsoft MVP, a certified trainer, fast track architect for Copilot Studio. So instead of me butchering that, can you spend a few minutes just introducing yourself and where you were and what brought you to this chapter of your life?
For sure. So I actually started as a pro code developer way back when. I actually found Power Automate, which was Microsoft Flow at the time. I started blogging because I was really interested in it. I did a lot of automation development at the time, wanted to learn, develop, and ultimately learn new things. So I coined the name Flow Joe. It's kind of stuck since then. And as Daniel said, I've become an MVP, I've become a fast track recognized solution architect, and an MCT and Microsoft certified trainer. I've really enjoyed my process of moving my career into the Microsoft technologies and then in turn learning all of this stuff. And I'm just super happy to be here today.
Awesome. No, I think this is great. Both of us will have a nice conversation about all these new features that are coming out. First things first, all right, let's just start with the basics. The announcement that happened on Jan 15. This was the big thing, all right? It came out about the whole Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, emphasis on the chat because that was the new feature. And then we also started getting the concept of agent consumption rates. So this is basically the whole agenda for this video, and I'm so happy to have Flojo with us. Now we are both of us come a lot from the Power Virtual Agents, the Copilot Studio side. So we won't spend too much time on the Copilot Chat, but it is important that we at least share a few nuggets about that. So here we go. The announcement was actually made by these two top-notch Microsoft people. There was Jared, who is the CMO, and Satya Nadella, who is the CEO. Each of them released videos on different social media channels. I've taken the links to both the videos and put it down in the description. So take a look at that. There's some good details on it. So it was neat because at least it gave you a good overview on that. So the first thing that Joe, I wanted to talk a little bit about was the Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat. It had the Microsoft 365 Copilot icon, but then it also had the Microsoft 365. So I'm kind of still getting comfortable with that piece over here. But these were the three big things that I noticed on the announcements which was made. So the chat piece is specifically it's a free AI chat powered by ChatGPT 4.0. But here's the new thing: it also has a consumption piece to that, and we'll talk a little bit more on that side. Agents is only pay for what you use. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then the good thing is that when all of this was released, it all had the IT controls on that because from the get go, it has to have the enterprise grade level controls. Otherwise, adoption can be a bit of a struggle. So in the watching the videos, reading the Microsoft blogs, like these were the three main things that I was picking up on that. Any thoughts on this one, Joe? And you looked at these things specifically on the 365 side?
For sure. Like I find it fascinating that Microsoft's gone down this path because the M365, like the actual structure of it, the icon, everything about it is just like globally known. It's one of the biggest brands out there for Microsoft. And now they've taken it and they've also introduced Copilot Chat to it. So it's not only is it enabling so many more people now to be experiencing Copilot. Let me just backtrack a second. It's very easy for someone like myself and yourself to think, okay, well, the new models out, this is out, that's out, and we're because we're always in it, we're always but what happened recently is during the summer, my sister came over to Canada for the first time, and I was like, "Oh, have you been like talking to all of these like AI chatbots and things like that?" And she was like, "I've not interacted with one of them." She didn't even know what ChatGPT was, but she's technology focused. Like she works
Wow.
in technology, but she's just not in the same area as me. And I just found it fascinating that there was someone out there that hadn't actually used ChatGPT yet, because I'm in my area, I'm thinking everyone's using it. Whereas like Microsoft now is like pushing out Copilot and pushing out these chat agents and things like that to the mass market. I think as time goes on, it's going to bring more and more people into it, and it's going to strive for more discussions from people from all different walks of life rather than just technology like we are.
All right. So, Joe, one of the things that I knew, and I'm pretty sure you do that as well, is we knew this license piece. Like it's Microsoft 365 Copilot, your UI for the AI, your AI assistant to work, and that's $30 per user per month. We knew that. But starting that January 15th, they as in Microsoft give us this information. And this is honestly what I welcome, because finally we have a breakdown of what that $30 is. We knew all the services that came along with it, but when it came to all the plumbing, the connections and things in the back end, this is what that $30 does. So now the Copilot 360, the chat is free. But if you want all of these things below that plus, see chat, work grounded, Copilot, Microsoft 365 agents, and so on and so forth, well, that also is the additional piece that comes along with it. So this to me was very welcoming, Joe, because it finally made me understand where all this $30 is being spent and what all we get along with it. So something that really caught my attention on this part.
I think it's quite value for money as well, right? Like $30 in the grand scheme of things isn't an incredible amount of money for potential return on investment, like saving time and effort, because time is money, right? So like saving time and effort working with Outlook, working with Word, working with Excel, working with PowerPoint, all of that, if you can amount how much time you spend on these type of things and how much, let's say, you get paid an hour,
Mm.
it can actually save you a significant amount of money, right? So I think that it's great that they've enabled a free entry and then a paid entry. This is going to then essentially give you kind of like a teaser. It's like um, a whet your appetite type of approach. Yeah, you get to experience this. Oh, wouldn't it be great with Teams? Wouldn't it be great with Outlook, etc.?
Right.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So just to talk about that concept, it says that the free part is a teaser, whet your appetite. But this chart, which is also there, again, links of all of this are provided in the description below. You can go ahead and take a look at that. This gives you a good breakdown of what is your Microsoft 365. The PUPM stands for per user per month, $30. But then now the Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, which one of it is free and in the consumption way. But this is what there's that free plus consumption. So not everything is free. That's what you got to be mindful of. It's good amount of stuff that starts off free, but everywhere you see this triangle. So for example, in that Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat column, you see that the things that are metered in the agents swim lane is use agents grounded in work data, and then also use agents that act independently using autonomous actions. We will double click on those two terms in just a few minutes, but that's what I wanted to bring their attention to you. Thoughts on this one, Joe?
My thoughts are like, I think that, as I mentioned previously, $30 per user per month. It sounds quite expensive, but in the terms of how much time and effort those individuals are likely to save, it's significant, right? So if you look at the left-hand side, I obviously understand that this is kind of like a marketing thing and things like that, but personal assistant is very key here, because I understand like people get kind of worried about AI coming into the workspace, AI having an impact on their roles. But what this type of AI is explicitly for is to help individuals, is
Mm,
to uplift individuals, and it's to create your workspace and your work environment to be a more pleasurable experience so that you don't have to spend so much time and effort writing out huge Word documents. You can have help and assistance for that. And for $30 per user per month, I think that for a lot of businesses, this is going to be a big selling point because it's going to reduce the time and effort individuals are spending on tedious
mm.
tasks and enabling them to actually focus on what really matters for the business.
No, well said. All right. So what I want to do now is pivot over a little bit into our Copilot Studio because that's where Joe and I really have our expertise on. So the announcements that was made for the Copilot Studio was these two things: the licenses and the new features. So the big announcement over here, Joe, I liked was finally the release of pay as you go. Because the message packs, which is $200 per tenant per month or per agent per month, however you want to talk about that, we already knew that. And then just like we just saw before, the $30 per user per month for the Microsoft 365 Copilot, again, we already knew that. But finally, there was the announcement of pay as you go. And that is $0.01 or basically 1 cent per message. Now, let that term message sink in a little bit because we're going to come back to that and we're going to talk a little bit about what this message is and why the importance of that. But this were the big announcements that was made on Copilot Studio side. But when it was not just the announcement on the licenses, there was also features. Now, I want to show you that there were some announcements on the features, but these are the three actual new features that was announced. So, web grounded answers, tenant graph grounding for messages, and then the autonomous actions. Now, the autonomous actions, that concept is not new. In fact, I've already done a deep dive video on that. I'll put the link in the description below, and so you can actually go and see what it does. But now we know that if you actually utilize it, how that consumption works. And so it's the consumption idea. That's the new feature part of it. So all said and done, I still think that there are new features which are announced, but these were the three big ones over here. But I'm really interested to hear Joe. Like Joe, finally, when we heard about the pay as you go, what was your reaction to that?
My first reaction was, is this going to cost us more money? And my second reaction was, obviously, it's great because it enables our customers, obviously, myself and Daniel are working in consultancy. It enables our customers to have further options of how they really approach Copilot Studio because the packs are a use it and lose it approach. So you're buying a bundle of messages, and if you don't use it that month, you lose them.
Yeah.
Pay as you go enables users to then just pay for what they use. But it'll be interesting to see if it actually costs more money or not.
So, all right, now let's kind of dig a little bit deeper, okay? Is the agent consumption rates. This is something which is absolutely important for everybody. Whether you are a IT manager, director, anybody on the top level side, whether you are a developer, you are an administrator, you are a citizen developer, you need to understand these concepts because that will actually help you decide, first of all, how to leverage Copilot Studio and where all is the cost associated with it. So the first thing is the use of agents is measured in messages. So the concept of messages is something that really needs to get ingrained in us for all of us who build Copilot Studio. Because why? Because the total cost of how much Copilot Studio costs for you is all based on the sum of the messages used by your organization. We really need to understand, first of all, how messages is used and the consumption of this message. That's the whole thing. Agent consumption rates. So now that you understand the importance of it, let me now take you to the next level. All right. This is everything about Copilot Studio, how you go ahead and leverage it, on all the features that come along with it. So on the left side are these Copilot Studio features. And those three new ones, which I just showed you in the slide before, that's one of the ones which have the brackets. So web grounded answers. When you go ahead and use that, you are actually consuming zero messages. So the first question that will come to you is, Daniel, what is this web grounded answers? So let's take a look at this. Okay, some of this is from the Microsoft documentation. Web grounded answers is to use or is gather information from entire internet and quickly pull the relevant information. So if you have information on the internet, all right, out there freely available for people, that is what's on the web, the internet, and it's grounded over there. So that's the whole concept of web grounded answers. It's pulling answers from that internet, that website, stuff like that. So it's kind of starting making sense what this web grounded answers is. And then in addition, also your own data, because you have data grounded in your own things such as Word or Excel, even PowerPoint presentations. So when you go ahead and are talking to these agents, you can literally upload these documents, and it'll start pulling information from that as well. But this is information you already have. Therefore, pulling it and getting that information, not having to go any additional hops and whatnot, the consumption for that is zero messages, which is good. That's only zero messages on that. Thoughts on that one, Joe? Like the ease of the web grounded answers, zero messages?
I think it's great that it's actually costing you zero messages, right?
Yeah,
It's like a freebie, really, isn't it? It's enabling you to focus on the key areas that matter while still having something free that you're going to use eventually.
right. And it's glad that you said that because it is free, zero consumptions. Because the next one after that is the classic answers, and this is sometimes where people do get a little confused. Like, what's the difference in a web grounded versus the classic? So, the classic answer concept is very, it comes naturally, especially if you've built agents. When you come from the Power Virtual Agent side, or if you're right now in the Copilot Studio and you're building the own agents, this is where you'll understand that. Because let's take a look at the description. It says used for predefined responses that are manually authored by agent makers. So for example, if you've got some conversation or discussion going on, and you in static information provide some answers, like you've actually put text over there, static answers, then those are classic answers, very specific to the type of the question, very specific to how you've made your agent logic flow, and answers are there. So this is not a web grounded; it is a very static one, and therefore the term classic on that. And so the last sentence over there is that these are static, do not change unless manually updated, and are typically used when precise responses are required. And so therefore for this situation, the consumption is only one message. So is there any other way that you kind of find the difference between web grounded versus classic? Any thoughts on that?
So I kind of use examples such as text messages, right? So,
Right.
you're sending a static message to someone. It's not retrieving any information from anywhere. You've manually entered that information. Well, with classic answers, if you're thinking about a manually authored topic, you're thinking, okay, well, I need to capture some information from this user. You're not going to want it to go through generative AI necessarily. You're going to want them to enter some information. You want to deliver some information that they need to enter, and you're having a back and forth with the user that's very rigid.
Mm.
It's not like retrieving any information from external sources or anything like that. So for instance, if I trigger a manual topic that I want to capture someone's name, I'm going to say, please enter your name.
Mm.
They're going to enter their name, and it's just going to be a back and forth type of rigid approach like that. Now, obviously, we are consuming like resources to still do that, but we're not consuming additional resources such as LLMs and things like that to work with generative AI. So it makes sense that there is going to be a consumption rate, but it's not high at all. It's just done based on the interaction of the user.
Yeah. So let's build on that as well. So now we have the generative answers. Now the generative answers is actually leveraging also the generative AI piece. Also, the difference between the generative answers and the classic is classic was static, while for generative it is dynamic. So let's actually read that. It says generative answers used for dynamically generated responses based on the knowledge sources and context. Knowledge sources could be wherever you go ahead and gain your existing knowledge that you have. And so it says that these provide more flexible and natural interactions, because they build on conversations, context, and available knowledge. So it is good from this standpoint that you might have knowledges in some places. There's examples which I'll show you in a minute about where that could be. But because this is now taking one additional step, like it has to go and now leverage your knowledge, and then based on the conversation you're having with the agent automatically using the general AI pulls very specific information from the knowledge. It just doesn't do a big dump of information. No, it pulls in very specific. So there's some additional work that is happening by the agent. And therefore, in this case, the consumption is two messages. It's not just zero anymore. It's not just one, but now it's two messages. So you see, this is how it's built. It's slowly consuming on the messages side, but for good reasons over here. Now, I'm going to go a little bit further over here because this is the place where Joe and I can actually talk a lot more about is the new piece, which is tenant graph grounding for messages. And this is where one of the big data sources, SharePoint, comes into play. Because I get questions asked all the time is that, Daniel, how can I go ahead and build agents when I already have so much knowledge in SharePoint? And I've actually done videos on that. I've shown you how SharePoint authentication works. I've actually shown you how you can go ahead and get that data, how it does such a good job. Now, what I can tell you is that when you go and leverage SharePoint, it is grounding for that message. So let's read that together. Okay, tenant grounding message, tenant graph grounding for messages. This provides high quality grounding for agents with relevant information from Microsoft Graph. So everything is happening through the Microsoft Graph in the back end, including files stored in your SharePoint and external data synced with Graph connectors. It does not include personal graphs such as emails and chats, which is fine. SharePoint being the big one over here. So your takeaway from this one is that if for your agent, if you are going to use SharePoint and however you build that agent, every time a conversation has happened and your agent goes ahead and seeks information from SharePoint, it might just be one message to you. I mean, it might just be one, you putting a question and it seeks one answer. But that process of it going and seeking that is 30 messages because there's so much work which is happening in the back end, all going through the Microsoft Graph connections and everything on that. Joe, I would love to hear your feedback on this one.
Uh, yeah. So when I first saw this, I thought, wow, that's really expensive. And then I was thinking, so why would Microsoft take this approach? And what I came to the conclusion is that if me as a user is querying SharePoint through the tenant graph, and I'm trying to gather some information, retrieve that information, generate a response, give it back to the user, you can already see just by me talking, there's a lot of steps in the process, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cost during that process. So it is quite hard to predetermine exactly how many steps and how many messages it's going to cost for every interaction, because it might have to go to multiple different SharePoint locations, all of this type of stuff, right?
Right.
Now, what I'm assuming has happened is Microsoft has decided, well, okay, on average, it takes 30 messages. So sometimes it may take less, sometimes it may take more, but on average, it takes 30 messages. So as you are consuming this, you're likely to use 30 messages on average. And that's how they've come to this conclusion of, okay, it's going to cost this much money. Now, do we know if Microsoft are making more money on you doing this or less money? We don't know, because we don't know exactly every step of the process, right? But we can kind of gather what's happening. I make a query, it goes through, it analyzes the query, it goes to through the Graph API, it goes to SharePoint, it does the search, it gathers the information, it processes that. It generates a response, it passes it back. It goes through cleaning as well, because you want to make sure that the response is appropriate, and then it comes back to the user. At that point, you can see there's so many steps. There's a lot of cost involved. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I think 30 messages is probably quite a lot, but at the same time, you're not having to relocate your data. You're not having to do all this stuff. You're just able to hook straight into your SharePoint that you're already probably using if you're a customer. And then in turn, you can retrieve information based on that with generative AI.
Yeah. The only thing I would add on to that is one of the things which is grounded in over here is authentication and authorization. If you are still seeking information from SharePoint, only the things that the user has access to on that SharePoint side will be pulled over here. So that additional authorization and authentication is part of that whole 30 messages. So I think that's worth saying that too, is that it's just not randomly going and picking anything. No, it does take into account security from that authentication and then the authorization. So that was actually worth kind of calling it out as well. And then so therefore this one, the tenant grounding for messages with SharePoint one, I put that up over there because that takes the 30 messages. So the last one over here is the autonomous actions. Now, for the autonomous one, it only takes 25 messages. And again, this one, the exact number of message consumption, why was this 25? It's kind of hard for us to, give you full answers to it, but we can tell you what it does. So I've actually done a whole video on how these autonomous actions work. Again, I'll put the link down in the description below. You can go and see that. And I always tell people that the autonomous piece is that the agents are now using the generative AI are smart enough to know that based on the conversation that are happening, it will go ahead and respond in a certain way, or it will go ahead and run certain actions to come up with some outcomes that you need. It automatically does that. You don't have to build any workflows or any topics saying, hey, if this, then do that. No, it automatically figures that out for you. That's the beauty of the autonomous piece. But for these autonomous actions and these autonomous activities to work, let's read the description. It says these events are steps such as triggers and topics, like I said, and they appear on the activity map in Copilot Studio when you test an autonomous agents. And these events don't include knowledge search, knowledge retrieval, and the AI builder. It doesn't do that. But it automatically goes ahead and actually uses the triggers, the topics, and things like that, all of that activity that is happening. Anything to add on this to this one, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's just similar to what we just talked about, is that like
Yeah.
it's probably Microsoft has worked out an average of what an autonomous action would take. Because as I mentioned previously, it's really hard to predict, especially with autonomous actions, exactly how many steps in the process it's going to take,
Yeah.
where the data is going to be retrieved from, because it's autonomous, right? Like you're not
Right.
manually creating it. So you have no control really over those steps. So averaging it out to 25 would make sense, right? Like they've
Mhm.
probably done some research um, and they've worked out, okay, well, on average, it takes 25 messages, and that's how they've come to this conclusion.
Right. All right. So what I want to do now is actually go back and take a look more on these consumption rates with an example. There is actually a part of this Microsoft documentation, something called as a billing event mapping. It shows you that, okay, if this was a scenario of your agent conversation happening, how would be the messages consumption? So let's take a look at that. All right. This is an agent which is actually going ahead and first of all getting the current weather of that location that you're having, and then it'll go ahead and pull in from the knowledge source. So it has the way to get the weather information, but then it is going to go ahead and leverage knowledge source that if you go and say, okay, I want this, for Daniel Christian. Well, Daniel is on the east coast of North Carolina. I mean, on the United States, in a state called North Carolina. Let's go and get Daniel's, location and address. Like it does that using knowledge sources. It'll also go ahead and pull information about, what are the airport locations which are available over there for Daniel. So it uses knowledge sources. After that, it is going ahead and booking a flight because that's the next thing. So booking the flight is happening after the previous two things are done: weather and then getting the location. And then again, two other knowledge sources like booking the flight, when are the flight available, what are the locations, all of these things. So point I want to make over here, a point of this example is from a end user perspective. All right, this is one conversation that has happened of going ahead and booking a flight. But while that steps are going through, while that conversation is going on, all of this activity is happening in the back end. There is different services that are being touched, from weather information to location of the existing employee to airline companies that you are hitting, and then again based on that, what are the flight times that you have, more knowledge sources, what are the airlines that your company can use. Like there's knowledge source and then there's other services and knowledge source again. These are all the messages consumptions that are going to add up. So going ahead and getting that weather information, it's a feature. You're hitting an action and therefore you're consuming that 25 messages over here. Other knowledges that you're hitting based again on the feature knowledges. If you're just using an internal knowledge, that's 2 messages. But if you're doing a graph grounding one, like hitting SharePoint, well, that's 30 messages. Same thing. If you just happen to go and get another knowledge, it's just a knowledge, 2 messages. You see, so it does add up. And it's important for us to kind of, understand this. And the good thing is that the activity now, which is that you can actually see the activity, it breaks this down for you. So it's not like you have to pull out a piece of paper and, figure this out. No, the activity does that for you. But this is just a really good example of how the consumption happens over here. But what are your thoughts about this example and how the consumption could be with just one
Um,
conversation?
so yeah, so like when I first saw this, I thought, oh wow, that is really expensive. It's going to add up, especially if you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of users. It's just going to start stacking up. But the good thing about the pay-as-you-go model, as you just mentioned, right, is that it's been quite hard to predict how many messages you're going to use if
Mm,
this is especially your first agent that might be public facing. Um, you may have a kind of an idea of how many users come to your site, and you can kind of predict what the interaction is going to be, but you don't know what the uptake of different areas of the agent is going to be, like your actions or your graph grounding, how much is going to be interacted with that. Now with the pay as you go, um, let's say this scenario, right? If you're on pay as you go, you're going to be able to at least see where your users are going to be using it and then decide if it's more beneficial to move over to the pack content. Obviously, we're going to go through this later on with the breakdown of the price, but I still think the pay as you go is very beneficial with these new features because you're able to kind of gather data before you fully commit to either pay as you go or
mm.
getting the packages.
One of the important things about before the pay as you go to understand more is this concept over here. So the message pack is what you go and buy those licenses, and the one of pay as you go, it seems to be sounding a lot more nicer now. So let's break this down right now because this is important. It's very important for everybody to know. So message pack, all right, it's $200 per month. You can go ahead and buy an agent, and that agent comes with 25,000 messages. And we just showed you how those messages get consumed. So like I was just joked a few seconds ago, I was like, the 25,000 just doesn't seem a whole lot right now. Well, the 25,000 comes with this 200 per month. And keep in mind, it does not carry over. So I really like the example Joe gave about, when you go ahead and, in this, but back in the day when we used to have our cell phone plans, it would come with this packet of minutes. But back then, those minutes rolled over. So just randomly, if this month I had only 100 minutes of using, or 100 text messages, if I didn't consume all my 100 text messages this year, say I only consume 50, that's fine. If 50 gets rolled over for next month, which means next month I would have 150 text messages. Well, that does not work over here. Here is in this month, all right? We are in the month of January. In the month of January, you paid that $200, you consumed 25,000 messages. If you didn't use all the messages, it is done with. Next month, you're going to start again with another $200 and fresh new 25,000 messages. No carryover for that. This is the one big licensing pack. It's called as a message pack. Now let's take a look at the pay as you go. All right, the pay as you go, one message is $0.01 or 1 cent, however you want to talk like that. But that's the cost of pay as you go. So one of the things Joe and I was actually when we were talking about this is let's give you a side by side comparison. So with that one, that one times 25,000, which is the 0.01 times 25,000, well, that comes to 250. So 25 messages on the message pack is $200. 25,000 messages on the pay as you go is $250. So there is like a 25% increase. But just like Joe was talking about, there are some perks to starting off with the pay as you go or even staying with pay as you go because of these reasons. So to help you with that, here's some examples that Joe and I kind of brought up. Now the examples are actually there on Microsoft's website, but we took it one step ahead. We actually did the breakdown. So let me talk about the example. So the example first one, okay, this call as the customer support agent. This is an example where you have a customer support agent for your website that answers questions based on customer report policies, product manuals that you provided to the agents as knowledge source, right? Basically all your customers are coming in and just getting information about all your website, all your company and everything. Like this is the type of place which can be hit pretty hard. So here's the thing: an average run comprises of 4 classic answers. And so remember, the classic answer means it's only using one answer. And then for also two generative answers for troubleshooting questions. So it is adding up. And then on an average, there is 900 customers per day. So one of the things over here is that the estimated cost, well, let's do the math. This section over here, that 4 by 1, well, there's the 4 classic answers. So 4 times 1. And then there is also 2 generative answers. For every generative answer, you're consuming 2 messages. So the total number of messages for that conversation is now 8. And actually, I have a little typo over here, Joe. It's actually it's not just per month. Based on this example, it is per day. So 8 messages times the 800 customers per day, you are now consuming 7,200 messages per day. Now, this is the amount for the 200 messages if you go with the message pack. Otherwise, you could go with the $72 for pay as you go. So, Joe, we did this together, but, tell me what you think. But I'm just thinking that for a high consumption like this, I mean, I'm almost feeling like just, I feel like the message pack, it might run off so fast. So for something like this, the pay as you go actually might be a much more better option, because at least you have the guarantee that if there's a serious peak during whatever some season of your company, you are still good. The pay as you go should cover that. But that's what I think. Like, what do you think about this example?
So I guess there's two ways of thinking about it, right? So the
Okay.
7,200 messages over, let's say, in the course of 30 days is going to be something like 216,000 messages. So um, it's a lot of messages, and it's going to add up really fast, right? But at the same time, you've got 1 cent per message. So again, pay as you go is going to add up really fast, and we know that it's 25% more expensive.
Right.
However, you have the flexibility with pay as you go, as you mentioned previously, is that this might just be a high consumer month. Like you might have slow periods, like you're a customer support agent. Maybe you're working for a business that is really busy during the holiday season, but then in January, February, March, you don't have a lot of customers come on. Maybe those customers per day drops to, I don't know, 10 just for returns and things like that. So I think you have a lot more flexibility with pay as you go in terms of responding to market changes and things like that. But I think just for ease of use, the packages are probably better and more cost effective, providing that you actually use those messages. So as I mentioned, it was like 216,000 messages over the course of 30 days, right?
Yeah.
That's 8.64 packs. So you're going to have to really buy 9 packs to cater for all of those messages. And again, you're going to then lose those additional messages that you have paid for because they don't carry over. So then you will have to kind of work out, okay, well, the messages that I'm losing during that time, is it less money than me doing the pay-as-you-go version? Because if I'm disposing of that 0.36 amount of messages from my pack, is it actually worth disposing of those because it's cheaper? It's actually cheaper than the pay-as-you-go version. So yeah, so like you have to, as a customer, consumer, or as a consultant, an architect, you have to like do this calculation. You have to work out what is better for your customer. Is it better to do the packs, knowing that you're going to have to dispose of some messages, or is it better for you to use pay-as-you-go and have the flexibility of just paying exactly for what you're using?
Okay. So, the previous example was more of a higher consumption one. This example is on a lower consumption. So you can actually see, so you have a tenant Microsoft grounded agent in Microsoft 365 Copilot, and the agent answers employee questions based on sales data connected to Microsoft Graph using connectors. It is on a sales side, so it's very low. Like it's not on an external with your customers hitting high. This is kind of a little low. However, the difference over here is that this is a Microsoft grounded agent. So it is going and go ahead and pull information from, say, your SharePoint, sites, going and putting your content over there. So here now things get a little different. So let's read on that. It says an average run comprises of 4 generative answers and 4 tenant Microsoft Graph grounded messages. And the average is 50 of Microsoft licensed users and 100 unlicensed users. So the estimated cost, again, per day is based on the following calculations. You will have, again, 4 generative answers. So that's the 4 times 2, and then also the Microsoft grounded one. So that's 4 of those Microsoft grounded. So that's 4 times 30. So we are now talking about consuming, for this example, because it's going through these generative AI and Microsoft grounded, it's 128 messages per conversation. So if you look at it from the both licensing standpoint, all right, the 128 for 100 customers per month, that's 12,800 messages, which falls inside your message pack, which is 25,000. But remember, this is for one agent, and that's it. Like, you could have more agents, but that one agent for this scenario consumes 12,800 messages per month. However, if you went with the pay as you go, well, that's $128 for pay as you go. 128 is cheaper than the 200 that you pay upfront. But these are the other scenario. Not a whole lot of messages, conversations going on, but because of where the data is coming in, it still consumes a high amount. So what do you think about this one? Because Joe, we just talked about pay as you go, maybe an option over there on the high consumption, but over here it's not so much as more conversations happening. It's actually where the content is sitting. So
Yeah.
the the conclusion that we came on example one, would that also work over here in example two?
I think so. I think the same approach has to be taken, but I think just looking at the numbers here, right? Like you can see that if you buy all of those messages for $200 a month, and you get 25,000 messages, and you're only using 12,800, um, then you're doing the same thing, and you're only paying $128. Well, obviously, $128 is a lot cheaper than $200. So you're going to likely go with the pay as you go, simply because it's more cost effective to do so, even though it is a more expensive approach overall. It's going to be, for your low consumption rate, cheaper for you to go down the pay as you go route, because you're going to be disposing of all of those messages. Now, if you see that your messages fluctuate quite a lot, so 1 month it's 25,000, 1 month it's 12,800, you may decide, for ease of use, you're just going to go down the message pack and just write off the months where it's lower. But for me, I would still probably push towards the pay as you go, because I think overall you're going to save a lot more money, especially on a low consumption model.
And one of the things I like about the pay as you go, that in the back end it uses Azure subscription model. Once you go and get up your subscription, you can actually put in some alerts like, this is the highest amount period I want to spend, but if you start creeping up to this certain amount, send me a notice. So you can go ahead and make sure that you're aware upfront. Like, it's not after all the consumption is done, you get hit with the high bill. No, you can actually put some caps. You can put some, and also notifications. So the pay as you go using the Azure subscription, the backend has all of these other bells and whistles that come along with it. Hopefully this gives our viewers some example, and hopefully, like, this discussion that we've had is actually helpful. So I just wanted to end over here. Joe, with everything that we've gone through, like, any closing thoughts, comments from your side?
I think that pay as you go, yes, it's expensive, but it gives individuals a different approach, and it gives also companies a different option of deciding, okay, well, maybe I want to trial a pay-as-you-go approach. I can then see how much I'm consuming and then decide whether or not it's beneficial for me to use the packs or stay with the pay-as-you-go approach. I think it does offer a lot more flexibility to licensing because you were stuck with those $200 for 25,000 messages. And especially if you was a smaller business, you kind of, it was really costly for you at that point, especially if you wasn't even consuming anywhere near that amount of messages. So I definitely think that pay as you go is beneficial, but I don't think enterprise customers will likely ever use pay as you go. I think they will probably stick with a messages pack simply just due to the sheer amount of volume that they're going to be consuming.
So hopefully this video was useful to you as Joe and I went through this conversation back and forth and sharing all of these examples and really drilling down through how this licenses, especially the conversations and the messages work. And hopefully this will help you make an informed decision to plan which licensing model works best for you. And as always, keep using Copilot Studio.